Hello, everyone, and welcome to the What If We Think Differently podcast. Here, we reimagine our realities. I am joined by Tendai Murisa this morning, and my name is Nonsegele Lonzula. Tendai, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's 2026 and we are on the go. And every year we have what we call the big bet. And last year we had the big bet and it said revitalizing accountability in African democracies. And this year we are rediscovering the middle. Before we get into those themes that I've given, what is the big bet about?
Interesting question, because a professor of mine read it and said, okay, I hear what you're saying, but what is the bet? And I said, it's a big bet. He says, okay, what is that? It's just an idea that what can be the idea of the year? What could we be focusing on initially at Severe Institute, but also with, we work within ecosystems of change with amongst other actors. So we just look for something that can be a hook, an entry point into the different wicked problems that we deal with on an everyday basis. So we just felt like we need to be coming up with something that defines the year at the beginning, to say we're making a bet on if we were to do these things, we could find ourselves having moved the needle.
Right. So who is it addressed to? I know definitely it speaks to our work that we do at CVO, but when you look at the broader picture, who do you have in mind when you do the big bet?
So the bet is an evolution from what I used to write as a memo. I used to write a memo every January, and that memo used to be for the teams. In my previous organization and at Severe Institute, I'll write the memo and I'll put across what I thought would be the big idea. But as it developed, I realized that there's need to share it with a broader audience. And as we're doing that, we get the inspiration from what others are saying, what we're reading. So the audience is literally whoever has access to what we write. We can pick it up and run with it. Ideally, we would want... You see, when you write, you're always hoping for that moment where it reaches what you can call the tipping point. It goes viral.
Yes.
So the audience is, I can't limit the audience to say, oh, I'm writing for students, but it's for us is to say, this is an idea that we're pushing across, and it's subject to debate, further scrutiny, criticism, even dismissal. But for us, it's just to say, it's part of the set of ideas that we think can shape a year.
Right. So let's dig a little deeper. Now we are getting into the big bet for 2026.
Yeah.
And we talk about the middle.
Yeah.
Right? I was like, the middle of what? When I first saw the title, and I love what I read going further. But explain to us, what did you have in mind? What then kind of made you write about the middle, especially in 2026?
We're living in a world of extremes. Almost every area that you can think of, or every domain, there are extremes. There are extremes to do with religion, the intolerance of different religions, that they cannot coexist. We're living in an extreme around, there's what you may call climate change deniers, and there are those who are saying climate change is an urgent problem. When you look at them, they're both extreme positions, and in certain instances, they actually base their arguments on science. We live in an extreme world where office holders and those who vote them into office hold different opinions. We live in an extreme world, or a different world of extremes, where there's a small population that is accumulating at a very fast pace. You know, the number of trillionaires and the wealth that they make is growing yearly. But also the number of the poor is growing and poverty is deepening. Extremes on one planet, in one area. So we're living in this world of these extreme polarized positions. Our politics are so toxic. I used to argue that, and I would write to say Zimbabwe's politics is polarized, is toxic. It's becoming the norm everywhere else. So we are living in a world of extreme positions. Then you begin to say, is there a middle position? Is there, because half the time the extremes have led us to a framing around winning.
Right.
Just winning. So there's no compromise. There's no middle. There's no place whereby you can come to say, we found each other and we agreed. Because all of us are pursuing things that look like extreme. For me to win, you should fail.
Right.
So there's nothing like we can both win
in the middle,
or we can compromise on what we want and still secure a result that satisfies both of us. So we're living in a world that if we're not careful, we are going just to be pulling each other apart. But here the appeal in the big bet is around saying, how do we rediscover middle positions? How do we move away from debate, towards deliberation. How do we move to a place whereby we can listen more than talk?
I like how you've brought about that element of polarization and the big tensions that are within our sectors and spaces, politically, economically. And there's an element that really caught my attention in the big bet, and that was around what you call the post-truth era and how you say it has increased by 2,000%. Could you just give us a little more detail around that? What did you have in mind for that?
That's fascinating. You know, I actually got that statistic from a devotional that I was reading. But when you really go in there, we are living, I think the advances that we have made as humanity, the advances we have made digital, technologically, etc., while at least they are good, they are also being used for bad. So what you're finding is truth-telling has become compromised for narratives that win a war, narratives that win the day.
Right.
So almost everything that we find ourselves in, we are now in a place whereby we have to fact check. So even our levels of trust on each other has been compromised. Because if you see an image on your social media handle, etc., the first question you may ask, is this real or is AI generated?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So even some writings, is this real? Whatever. So we are living in a place whereby information can be generated from a machine perspective to push a certain narrative. So in many instances, what we are being told as the truth is not necessarily the truth.
Right.
And sadly, what is not the truth at times is helping certain positions win the day. So justifications for war, justifications for certain economic positions are being pushed by this post-truth thing that I make reference to. So if you look at almost every excuse that we have made for engaging in war, it is influenced by a post-truth phenomena. Every decision that we make on who to elect at times is influenced by this post-truth phenomena that I'm making reference to an extent that we hardly know the truth now. The truth is becoming hard to come by.
Right. I remember reading the sentence just underneath the, truth, the era of post-truth, and how people blatantly now deny the truth. I can decide, yeah, that's the truth, but actually, no, it's not my truth.
Exactly. So is this thing about my truth, what does that mean? Is there a place where we can say, okay, we may disagree, but the objective reality is this one. So for me, this crisis is manifest in politics, especially electoral democracies, where truth has been compromised to win the vote. Yeah. And also, and worryingly for me, in the climate debates. What is the truth about the climate? Because let me give you an example. There is an observation right now. Many climate change scientists had predicted that with climate change, what we will see will be the thinning of forests. So that's why you find this thing around carbon sinks, that we should allow forests, etc. But what has happened in 2024, 2025 is actually that the Amazon, the largest forest in the world, has increased in its density. The trees are thicker, etc. Then the climate deniers are beginning to say, there's no climate change.
They lie to us.
Yeah, there's no climate change. Look at what is happening to this forest, etc. But the scientists are saying, what this forest is benefiting from increased levels of carbon output. So carbon is like a fertilizer, and too much of anything is dangerous.
Right.
So if there's no reduction of this carbon, what you're seeing today is good is actually going to be detrimental to this forest. You see, the extremes. So same data, people interpret it differently. So that's where we are. In many instances, we actually manipulate evidence to help us promote our positions.
Right, to pursue our own agenda.
Our own agendas. If it's to say I'm going to embark on a war, you can use the same data. Or the post-truth in South Africa, neighboring South Africa. We saw from Norway, we saw images coming from the White House saying that there is genocide.
Happening in South Africa.
Yes, I remember. But they'd used evidence, they'd video footage of these memorials, these crosses that had been put on as memorials. So they exist, but they are not what they are claiming them to represent.
Such a dangerous era to live in.
So we're living in a very dangerous time, because somebody then, I remember a friend of mine calling me from the US saying, what is going on in South Africa? I said, what do you mean? He says, we see these images of genocide. I said, Eesh. And my friend is white, so I have to be very careful how I explain this. So it's how we use existing, at times we use old footage. Old footage.
Resurfacing with a different context
Exactly.
altogether.
We use old footage to justify our positions. So now it's not just AI generated. We also do it deliberately. We go into our archives, we pull something that is out to support our position.
We've had this conversation in our previous episodes, if you'd like to find out, where we talk about AI. And I think it was in one of the papers that you wrote about, and how AI was used to actually start some form of genocide somewhere, and how AI is actually taught what it should push, the type of propaganda that should go out there. So we'll pause that there, but you can find it on one of our episodes. Now let's
call it the algorithm.
The
algorithm works. If you push it in a certain way, the algorithm helps you, especially on Facebook. Just try to watch something different on Facebook for 3 days. Start watching maybe diets, food fads,
everything else that
then
comes out.
Just do it for 2 days. Then see, because you will have shaped the algorithm of what you watch. See what then comes on your feed.
Absolutely. So now I'm going to bring that conversation back to the middle. When you wrote this and you talk about compromise and more about deliberation rather than debate, what did you have in mind? What is the ideal of the middle?
At the moment, I think if we're not careful, we'll never discover each other. And nation building is in terms of a democratic vision where we bring together different viewpoints and different interests into one place, require of us to move away from debate, because debate by its very nature has got winners. I'm going to a debate, I've done my notes, I'm going there to win. And you know, especially for us who follow global politics, you know, one of the most iconic moments is the presidential debates in the US. And we always say, even the pollsters say, so-and-so won this debate by so much percent. So the idea is around winning. But what I'm saying is that winning has brought us this far. And winning has brought us to this precipice, a very dangerous crisis moment. And there's a danger in pursuing winning at all costs. So we're saying that even in how we engage in conversations around public matters, public interest issues, how do we find each other? So for instance, I belong to a church, not just a church, but the global church. How do we deal with positions that are difficult? How do we deal with LGBTQI issues? How do we deal with those positions that are not comfortable to us? Because we also can easily get ourselves in a place whereby we dismiss and say, we condemn, it's sin. And in politics, anything else, this is our challenge for us who work in the non-profit sector, civil society, and we do advocacy. Anything we raise to government to say, we are telling truth to power, those in office dismiss that to say that's a regime change agenda. So they never take time to really listen to what we're saying, but they already put us in a certain bracket and they don't listen to us. And we also risk the fact that when they say they have done this, we dismiss to say that's propaganda. But the middle requires of us from different constituencies to be able to seek, number one, the truth, but number two, to find each other, to hear what each is saying, and to begin to say, how do we move forward? Because there's something that is at stake. It could be our climate, it could be our commons as a community, it could be our nation, it could be our economy. All those things are publicly owned. So there's no one with a single narrative of how they can be fixed. But all of us, using our collective wisdom, in a tolerant place, we can come up with solutions. But at the moment, we are yet to build those safe spaces where we can meet each other, acknowledge our differences, acknowledge we're coming from different viewpoints, but we're here to learn from each other and forge a common position.
I love that you spoke about building the safe spaces, because where we are, definitely, from my opinion, there are no safe spaces. But let's move into Africa within the context of the middle, right? I know you mentioned in the big bet that Africa seems to be an appendage of sorts. It's almost just hanging on the side,
a junior partner.
A junior partner of the agenda of the world. So how does that play out for Africa in this ideal middle?
If you really look at African leadership, African diplomatic efforts, and if you look at, I'm not taking you to history, but I'll take you to most recent, the efforts of President Ramaphosa when he was chair of the African Union, etc. And he took several leaders to go and meet with President Putin, then also met with the leadership in Ukraine to find a diplomatic position. But from a common sense and also from an Ubuntu framework, which defines us as Africans. That was leadership.
Right.
But the challenge is, at the moment, because of our intolerance, if all that Africa brings to the table is common sense, it won't work. Because we define power using a different set of values. We define power based on your economic contributions to the global economy. We define power based on the ammunition you have. And if Africa does not have these, Africa remains a junior.
It does not have a seat at the table.
Yeah. So the global framework is around the Security Council. The permanent members of the Security Council, they are 7 or 8. Africa is not. At a certain time, African countries are invited to be non-permanent members. So if you're really looking at geopolitics, the Security Council, up until now, the disruptions we're having with the Trump era, was the apex council of determining world peace, determining how to resolve global conflict.
Right.
But Africa was always a junior partner. So for us, we've always seen two things. That on the one hand, Africa does not usually speak with one voice. Does not usually do it. Those who work with Africa tend to divide it. There's a divide and conquer. So for us to begin to say we have an influence, even if we were to operate according to the same value system of the global world, how can Africa, which owns the most important natural resources, remain a junior in the global economic system? How do you explain that? If you're talking about the future of renewable energy or just energy, Africa is the source. If you're talking about the future of labor, Africa is the source. But still, Africa remains a junior. So for me, there's something in the formula that is not working. But rediscovering of urgency is not going to take Africa raising a megaphone and beginning to say we demand our place. Because all those who have those places that was not the route they took. The route to power is to organize yourselves. The route to power is to actually implement the different visions and frameworks we have so that Africa can begin to contribute more meaningfully to the global economy. Africa can begin to take advantage of its mineral base through mineral beneficiation so that Africa can begin to determine the prices of the goods it produces.
Right.
That's where power is. But at the moment, because almost each and every African state feels that they have to negotiate on their own with different global power players, Africa remains a junior partner because Africa lacks a concerted voice around many issues.
So it's safe to say that if we are to move towards this middle, we definitely need to work on our engagement as, I'll call it, citizens of Africa, right? So moving on to, there's elements that you talk about around economy, multilateral, I think, companies that you also talk about. So how does that feed into the middle? Is it still the same element of we need to bring our economies together so that we can stand together? We need to bring our politics together so that we all have one voice. What were your thoughts around that?
So there's a little idea that I'm pursuing, and I think I have to pursue it a bit further, around the capitalist sector, business. When I talk about the middle and say, how does that look like? In many instances, business measures itself by the profits it makes. Yeah, so you know that Apple is worth so much $1 trillion, Google is worth so much. I'm for a new way of measuring impact. How about if we measured how much company X has helped to restore the environment? How much company X has helped to keep lights on for poor people? How much? At the moment, we don't use those matrices. It's just something that they do. Maybe they give to a little foundation, etc. But I think there's something wrong with that because we've disrupted the global order. The order is that business should be a solution to people's well-being, not to the shareholders.
Right.
So the solution, when the people in business talk about, is the innovation they bring to say this innovation is going to make your life easier if you use the smartphone, etc. But we're saying that the profits have to be deployed in a more meaningful way to deal with issues. The global issue that we're dealing with right now is inequality, poverty, climate change. How is the capitalist sector contributing towards this? Not just looking at how they are making profit, because they are making profit from this crisis, but how do they contribute to its resolution, this global crisis? So that's the middle that I was talking about, to say, and I was using the context of Africa saying that with the departure of international aid, the closure of USAID, and what we're seeing with EU's government, EU countries when they're beginning to reduce their aid. Sweden has already announced that they are going to close their office in many countries, including Zimbabwe. That's CEDA. So we begin to say, so who is going to plug the hole? Because we know, for instance, in the health sector, many of our African countries, 50 to 55% of their health budgets were coming from aid. So who's going to cover that? And I know you guys had a discussion around GBV.
Yes.
GBV responses across Africa have been funded by traditional funders, ODA and private philanthropy. So I begin to say, how then are we saying Africa can discover her agency if our own business sector, the African business sector, is not involved in these issues? So moving to the middle is to say less emphasis on the quantum of financial profits, but a broader framework that measures profit from a social impact perspective. And I believe I'm not the first one to talk about this. There are men who have written about this. But to begin to say, given the challenges we are facing, and we're coming to a realization that no one is coming to save us, perhaps we need a new conversation about the role of business in society.
Absolutely. I think that also feeds into the reporting systems around ESG at the moment.
Yeah.
It's one element of it. I mean, there are many aspects that we could look at that could feed into that frame of thinking and the model around development. So as we bring this conversation to a close, just to retake, we've spoken about what the middle is, and we have said it's the ideal, right, of us coming together, us having conversations for the greater good, putting together our minds, our ideas, services, products for the greater good. So as we close tonight, do you have any closing remarks around the middle?
So I'll raise the worries around the middle, because the middle, in its essence, is not necessarily new. The middle is what has shaped global diplomacy, the United Nations, etc., bringing warring parties to the table to discuss, not without condemning, to say you are wrong, you are right, but that. So when we talk about this, we then sound as if we're naive, because we're seeing the undoing of the global the global peace architecture. So what we're now beginning to realize is that we are on the brink of a global catastrophe of intolerance, where we begin to say, my right is my right. Your right, I can't be bothered about it. So that's an important thing to really raise, to say that's the agency around saying, what then is the solution? How then do we try to address the issues? And another worrying phenomena for me in terms of discovering the middle is the state of African governments. African governments have closed themselves off. It's now even more difficult to carry out advocacy actions. African governments have become closed systems where they pretend to be open systems. They actually open up pseudo NGOs that then look like they are pushing certain positions. But African governments, I'm not talking about Zimbabwe only, we see it in South Africa, we see it everywhere. The intolerance of dissenting views that are not aligned to their own propaganda is closing off. So we need to find a way of saying, how do we renegotiate, or how do we reopen spaces for discussion of public problems? Because African governments cannot say they have, all of a sudden, they have the know-how and the wherewithal around fixing all the problems. We've come to realize, and not only us in Africa, in the US, the OPEC countries, that public problems cannot be fixed by one agency alone. It takes a with approach.
Right.
So the moment you say we're working with citizens, then you need to come back to the ideal of the middle, because you have to be compromising. You have to deal knowing that you've got limitations of what you can do as government. You need other partners to come and help you. You also need to understand that certain positions you may have taken, citizens will not align with them. So if we do not breed a culture of tolerance within power holders, we are on the brink of and us against them. And I'm not trying to say we're on the brink of war, but our challenge is that whatever gains we have made in the past could easily be eroded.
Right, I love how you've put that so well, that we need to, create safe spaces for people to engage. And we've had this conversation. We started with the tensions that exist globally. what is happening now and why we don't have a middle politically, economically. And then we've come to Africa and said, what is Africa's role within this middle that we are trying to build? And now we've closed this off and talked about citizens. What is their role and how do we engage to make sure that they are part of this middle that we are forming, part of the safe spaces that we need to create? So Tendai, thank you for sharing the big bet for 2026. So as CVO Institute, that is our big bet, the middle. My name is Nontsegele Lonzula, and this is the What If We Think Differently podcast. You can catch us on YouTube. You can also find the big bet on the CVO Institute website, which is www.cvoinstitute.org. You can follow us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you again soon.
Asanteni.
To subscribe, you can look for What If We Think Differently on Spotify. You can also look for What If We Think Differently on Apple Podcasts. On YouTube, you will find us on CVO TV. To stay up to